Welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast, your go-to source for personal, professional, and organizational growth and development. We hope you tune in often for all things people management, organizational development and change, organizational leadership, and social impact related. Maximize your personal and organizational potential with Human Capital Innovations Podcast. Welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast. In this HCI podcast episode, I talk with Melanie Pump about managing insecurity in the workplace. Melanie Pump, welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, it is a pleasure to be with you today. I'm really excited for this conversation. We're going to be focusing on the topic of your recent book, Detox, Managing Insecurity in the Workplace. Right now we're dealing with a whole lot of stuff in our workplaces, and insecurity is one of the many types of challenges that we face. So we're going to unpack that and try to better understand that issue for ourselves in the workplace, but also as leaders, what we can do to support our people and help them to get past those insecurities also. As we get started, I wanted to share Melanie's bio with everybody. Melanie Pump is an accomplished CFO and business leader. She is also the author of Detox, Managing Insecurity in the Workplace. In the book, she shares her learnings and experiences on the impacts of toxic work environments. Melanie has appeared on CTV, Fox, ABC, SiriusXM, etc. And her website, melaниepump.com, includes more helpful insights on how businesses and employees can reach their full potential. And I'm all about that. Maximizing and reaching your full potential, I think, is really the primary role of any leader that they're trying to help their people to maximize their potential. So I'm excited to explore all of this with you today. Anything else you would like to share with listeners by way of your background before we launch on into the conversation?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good high-level overview. Probably all that I would add is sometimes people wonder, well, why is a financial executive here talking to us about insecurity? And typically that's more HR, organizational behavior. But I had a bit of a different journey coming into the work environment. I started actually as a receptionist and worked my way, all the way up. And so struggled with some of those insecurities and imposter syndrome that we might get when we come into the workplace and grow our careers in that manner. So that's given me a little bit of a deeper insight into, the human nature side of what happens in the work environment. So I have the financial executive part, so really understanding how that actually impacts the bottom line, and then also the personal experience.
Yeah, excellent. And that's really great that you've had that experience of kind of growing up in the organization and going through those rungs. It gives you a lot of perspective. I think it can add empathy to the experience of dealing with other people who perhaps, it's interesting because sometimes, you'll talk to leaders, and I don't think anyone would say out loud that they are above their people or that somehow they're better than their people, because everyone knows that's not a socially acceptable thing to say. But I think it's a commonly thought, sentiment. I think many leaders really do believe that and feel that way, even if it's a little bit of an implicit, bias in the back of their heads. And so, I have found that just when we can relate to our people in really true, authentic ways, it makes a big difference when we're trying to understand where they're coming from, but also help support them as they're dealing with those insecurities. Yeah,
I absolutely agree, because for me, I do think that's helped me connect a lot more with people. And it's also helped me realize that all of us have that potential in us. If there's a leader that's working with us and helps us kind of move out of our comfort zone and we feel safe. So if we create opportunities for people, sometimes unexpected things can happen. And that happened for me going from receptionist up to CFO. I don't know that many people would have thought that when I first got into the corporate world, but when you have healthy, positive leadership, it's amazing what can happen.
Yeah, absolutely. So you already mentioned imposter syndrome. I think that's one piece, right? But we can get more into that as well. But let's start unpacking really the core content and context of your book, Detox, Managing Insecurity in the Workplace. What are some of those different forms of insecurity including, imposter syndrome and others that we can start to unpack and discuss a little bit.
Right. So insecurity is there's many ways and reasons why we might feel insecure. Some of them are personal and rooted in things that maybe happened in our childhoods or that are happening in our personal life. But what's happening in our work environment impacts that. Because if we're in an environment where we don't feel safe, for one, it can trigger some of those insecurities that we may have gotten from earlier in our life, but it can also trigger new insecurities given how our job is so crucial to our survival and our living. So if we don't feel safe within our work environment or safe that our job is secure, that can really start to manifest some really unproductive behaviors.
I think that's really the issue, right? I mean, everyone has their baggage, everyone has their insecurities. It's part of the human condition. We can't completely get rid of that. But we also don't need to feel like we have to sit in it forever either. Like we can learn and grow and get past it.
Absolutely, we can, but we do need an environment that creates safety, and when it doesn't, so what I started observing in the workplace, particularly in environments that weren't safe, is employees were using behaviors to defend and protect themselves. Well, for one, just defensiveness. When an employee is insecure, they're going to be defensive. They're not going to take feedback well because they're trying to protect their psyche. And then you also see people being passive aggressive because they're afraid to speak directly. They procrastinate about things that they're worried that they might fail at. So these are some of the behaviors that can happen that are not only work against somebody reaching their full potential, but it also damages the business's ability to reach its full potential because employees aren't being as productive as they could be.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit more about that toxicity piece. And the flip side of the coin there, I think, is psychological safety. So when you have an organization that has psychological safety, a lot of those toxic behaviors kind of melt away. I mean, it's kind of antithetical, right? You can't have psychological safety when there's toxic bullying behaviors, all those sorts of things. And so how do we go about then detoxing and creating more of a psychologically safe environment so that when insecurities manifest themselves, because we all have them, that we can then deal with them in a proactive and positive, healthy way, as instead of perpetuating, the passive aggressive tendencies or whatever our fallback is?
There are some really, foundational things that are important in a company to create psychological safety, and some of them, transparency is really key in creating certainty in an environment where people feel safe. If we don't know what's happening, or we don't know what's expected of us in our role, or we don't know how well our company is doing, all of those things are going to create insecurities because we just don't know how well we're doing, and we don't know if our job is safe. So it's just as a foundation, I really believe in high transparency within a company as much as possible with employees. And that includes also making sure you let people know when they're not meeting expectations, because, we are very sensitive as humans. And if something isn't quite right, we're going to pick up on it. And if our leader doesn't tell us, that's going to create insecurities. So really foundational is establishing high transparency and good communication within an organization is a great first step to establish a safe environment.
Yeah. And when we're not open and transparent, people tend to kind of fill in the gaps.
Oh, where, absolutely. With the worst case scenario.
With whatever their imagination can dream up, right?
Yeah, and that's a fact. Yeah, absolutely. There's been a lot of research around that we do jump to the worst case, and we'll try to establish certainty for ourselves when somebody doesn't give it to us, and that can be really dangerous for a corporate culture if people are always assuming the worst when they don't know what's happening.
Yeah, absolutely. So that transparency and communication piece really is key. Yes. And it doesn't happen for a variety of reasons. Sometimes leaders feel like their people won't want to be bothered with the information. Sometimes they feel protective of the information, or they feel like they have power through kind of hoarding the information. Other times it's just simply they aren't very skilled at communicating,
or they just don't realize it's not clear. I've also seen it happen a lot where leaders think because it's clear to them, it must be clear to everybody, and therefore they don't share it. But what they don't realize is it's not obvious. So what we think might be obvious as a leader isn't always obvious to those around us. So generally, over communicating more than you think you need to, is really what's what's required to create the right level of transparency.
Yeah, and it's a tricky thing. So when you're in C-suite level types of meetings, you're talking about these things all the time, right? And so
Mhm.
you understand it. You feel beaten over the head with it. You feel like, can you
Right,
just stop talking about it?
right.
And I think it's a natural thing to then, take your level of comfort or discomfort with something and how much you discussed it, and then kind of project that onto everyone else and say, well, of course. Or we had a meeting. I talked about it 6 months ago. Everyone should know.
Exactly.
That's not the way it works, but that's, I think, how it goes through people's minds.
Right. So much of our, as leaders, what we do that actually causes problems is unintentional. I think, all leaders and all people really, I believe, want to do what's best and want to create a positive environment. But often it is these kind of unintentional, not realizing that people don't understand, and that you do need to communicate messages multiple times in order for them to land, because people have many things going on and they may not understand the importance of something that you've told them.
Yeah, well, and that's the other thing is we get bombarded with communications all the time,
Yeah.
and so we're saturated, and it's hard sometimes to figure out what's really important to pay attention to, or whatever.
Yeah.
And I think I'm a university professor in addition to doing consulting stuff in this podcast, and I think when I'm working with my university students, whether it's undergrad or grad students, this principle holds true. Like, I have to over communicate, and I have to be super, super explicit. So things that are super clear in my mind, I've been teaching this stuff for forever, and I see the connections. But just because I see the connections doesn't mean they're going to see the connections between what I'm having them do, or the theory and the practice, or whatever. And so I have to be super explicit. I have to repeatedly communicate. So it's funny, like, if I'm having the students do an assignment, there's an assignment description in the LMS system. There, I post an announcement about it. I record a video describing it. I talk about it in class. Like, I usually have 4 or 5 different ways that I try to communicate what I want them to do and how they're going to be held accountable to it and what the expectations are. And even then, there's often students who really just don't get it. And so it's not that different when we're leading a team of people.
I don't think it is at all. Yeah.
Right?
Everybody has different processing abilities. Everybody's going to focus on different facts, and having multiple methods of communicating, like as you've done, is really great, because some people, they'll read something, but it won't sink in. They need to hear it. So yeah, you really have to try to put yourself in other people's shoes, and communicate things in multiple ways, so that it'll land on people that are maybe not just like you. So they won't understand it in the same way.
I'm excited to announce the publication of my new book from HCI Press, Bluer Than Indigo Leadership: The Journey of Becoming a Truly Remarkable Leader. Early in my adult life, I learned about an Asian proverb that translates as bluer than indigo. If you think about the color indigo, it is a brilliant, deep, and vibrant blue, what some would call the bluest of blues. To have something that is bluer than indigo is rare and truly remarkable. Contrary to popular myth, there is no one-size-fits-all or cookie-cutter approach to effective leadership. There's no silver bullet, no secret sauce, no go-to model that will solve all of our problems. The truth is, great leaders have all had their unique strengths and flaws, and have all had to discover and then pave their own distinctive path in their life's journey to fulfill their leadership potential. Bluer Than Indigo Leadership will help you discover your own path and explore those ordinary, everyday actions that will help you respond to an uncertain future and produce extraordinary results for individuals, teams, and organizations.
Yeah, and something else I have to remember, I live and breathe, eat, sleep, this stuff, OD, leadership. So this is what I think about all the time. For most
Right.
people, it's not what they think about all the time.
Right.
And so I have to recognize that.
Yes.
I also have to remember, whether it's students in the classroom or executives in an exec ed program, or people people on my team or people I'm consulting with, regardless of that context, I need to remember that I need to consistently over communicate, repeat myself almost to the point where I feel uncomfortable, perhaps even past the point where I feel
Yeah.
uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Um,
And know
and
your audience, like you
and
just told me. Yeah.
know your audience, and then be willing to be there and be supportive of people when they still have questions, because they still will.
Right. Yeah, I totally agree. And creating avenues for questions. So somebody to email after, or if it's a bigger initiative, a champion within an organization who goes in and checks in with people after, depending on the exactly what you're communicating about.
Yeah. And, again, I'm a professor. I love the university space. I love learning. I'm not typical. Like, most students don't become professors and don't want to become professors. And so their experience in the classroom is going to be very different than what my experience was when I was an undergrad. So I can't think just because, oh, well, if I was a student in this class, I would totally get it, or whatever. Like, that doesn't matter, right?
Absolutely. Like,
Same thing in the organizational setting with my team.
Exactly, because my brain, tends to work as a finance person, so I understand things in a very 1+1 black and white kind of way that will make other people gloss over. So when I am doing communications, I have to make sure that I lay that out. And the other thing that's really important that I've seen organizations not always do is explaining the why. So like when we're communicating, sometimes we tend to just say, this is what's happening, or this is what we're doing. And that will that'll leave open a whole bunch of questions and make people wonder, well, why is this happening? So the other thing, on top of making sure we're over communicating, also, give people credit and respect that they probably want to understand why things are happening the way they are. So include that in communications as well.
Yeah. It's like effective parenting. If I just tell my kids because I said so,
right.
What's the response probably going to be? It's not going to be all that different with my people. Yet leaders do that all the time, and in part, sometimes it's just because they're trying to be more efficient, save time. They don't want to have to explain again to another person. I get that.
Yeah,
but that's part of the deal. You have to.
And for engagement, like for people to also, so not only to feel secure, but also to feel engaged and involved in what's happening in the business, explaining the why of decisions is really important.
Yeah. So over communication, being transparent, all these things we've been talking about the last several minutes, super important. What else do we need to focus on as we're trying to detox and create a psychologically safe environment?
Also ensuring that you do manage bad behavior when it happens. So it is quite common that none of us like conflict. Difficult conversations are difficult. So when somebody is exhibiting behavior that is poisoning the environment or creating toxicity, I do often see that it just gets let to happen for too long. And that is essentially saying that you accept that kind of behavior. If leaders don't deal with negative behavior, they're letting everybody else in the organization know that that's actually okay. So we do need to deal with that. And one of the things with this is often people that are exhibiting toxic behavior don't even always realize the impact that it's having on those around them. So just as a starting point is making sure that we're letting people know how the way that their conduct is impacting their peers and giving them an opportunity to improve that. So it's not like the minute somebody does something wrong, we have to exit them from the organization, but we do need to make sure that we're communicating what behavior is acceptable in the company and the way that they have been conducting themselves is not, and then give them the opportunity to improve.
Yeah, so facilitating those difficult conversations, having mentoring and coaching conversations, ongoing regular feedback is essential. And you can't just ignore, put your head in the sand when you see bad behaviors. And that really is what I see most of the time in most organizations is people ignore because they don't want to deal with it until it gets to the point where they can't ignore it, and then they just fire the person.
Right. And they've often lost good people along the way because, people who are really talented and are good for a company are going to have opportunities elsewhere. And if they're coming into work every day and in a negative, toxic work environment, they may not stick around. So in allowing that behavior to continue, you might be losing people who could really be driving your organization forward.
Well, yeah, and not only the other people on the team that don't want to be in that kind of toxic environment or the perceived inequities or whatever may be occurring, but the person who's exhibiting the behaviors, if we're not actually being forthcoming with them about their performance and how they're interacting with people and what they need to be doing and what the expectations are, how they can change and helping them to develop. If we don't at least try to have some of those conversations, we can often lose very good people who may be exhibiting the toxic behaviors themselves simply because they don't realize it, or they don't recognize
Yes.
what they're doing. They don't know what they need to do different. And so if we just support them a little bit,
Yeah.
not only can we avoid other people leaving because they don't want to be around that person, but we can coach them into success as
Right.
well. And especially
Yeah.
right now in this labor market, when we're struggling to hire and find good quality skilled people, we don't have the luxury of just kind of dilly-dallying and ignoring bad behavior and then eventually firing somebody. And in the interim, and all of the carnage in their wake,
Yeah.
of disruption.
Well, and the reality too is it may actually be something that's within the work environment, a fixable thing in the work environment that is causing this person to act that way. Because often, when we are exhibiting toxic behaviors, that it can be coming from insecurity. So maybe this person has been given tasks that they don't feel like they have the skill set for, and it's causing them to react with defensiveness or aggression. When if they're just actually given support, perhaps they could complete those tasks and feel better and feel safer themselves. So often it is things in the environment that are triggering people to act in ways that are unproductive.
Awesome. So as we talk a little bit more about this detoxing, creating psychological safety, we'll also layer in any additional thoughts you have around the types of insecurities people have that manifest themselves in these types of environments, because I think that's just really, really key. So what are some of the other ways that we can go about detoxing and creating that psychologically safe environment?
Yeah, and I kind of just touched on it there, but one of the really critical ones is making sure that you do have the right people in roles, because when people are put into positions that they aren't right for or they're not prepared for, that can trigger insecure type behaviors, because that's when you get the imposter syndrome happening and people become protective of information, collaboration drops, people are less likely to throw out ideas because they don't feel like they're valid, or they're too nervous to do so. So really being thoughtful about when we promote people and put them into positions. I often see it happen in organizations that leaders think they're doing somebody a favor by promoting them into a role, but it's actually a role that they're not ready for. And then that ends up creating a lot of insecurities and in sometimes even just damaging that person because they end up failing in a role that they just weren't right for. So we really need to be thoughtful about when we put people into positions, making sure if they aren't ready for it, that we provide the training and support that they need.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. The Peter Principle is alive and well in pretty much every organization. and we have a whole lot of well-meaning, fairly incompetent people in roles, it's not because they don't want to do a good job. It's just we're setting them up for failure, like you said. And to come back to the insecurity piece, people manifest insecurities in different ways, and some people kind of close in on themselves. So if I'm feeling imposter syndrome and I'm feeling just really uncomfortable around my peers, it may only be internal. I may only be dealing with anxiety and frustrations and just trying to process it all myself, and still just trying to put on a brave face and just kind of go out and do the best I can and learn over time. That's one way that people try to deal with their insecurities. But there's often really negative ways that people try to deal with their insecurities: false bravado, aggression, essentially trying to assert their power and control over people, so they have a sense of security amidst the insecurities that they feel. All of those types of things also manifest, and that's the real danger. I mean, both are dangerous and both will have negative outcomes for the organization. But when we're talking about that toxic environment, I mean, those are the people that we have to be very careful about, because again, regardless of intention, no judgment there, but it's just the reality of the lived experience of people in that team. When those toxic behaviors are happening, it's just going to continue to reap discord and problems.
I agree. It does manifest in those two ways. There's those of us that it shuts us down, which is where, it really limits our potential because we have a talent that we're too scared to show. But then there are the other side of the coin. And I have seen that too, where it results in real aggression and defensiveness and bravado to a certain extent to mask the insecurity, which is very visibly toxic to an organization, because they're actually, then those people with those behaviors are actually impacting the other people who are insecure and are closing themselves down. So you just have a sort of toxic soup of insecurity when you have that happening in an organization.
Yeah, excellent. Well, Melanie, I know at the time I only have you for a few more minutes. Before we close, I wanted to give you chance to share with listeners how they can get connected with you, find out more about your work, your team, your book, and then give us the final word on the topic for today.
Yeah, so I have my website, which you mentioned earlier, at melaniepump.com. I'm also quite active on LinkedIn, so definitely follow me there. And my book is available for sale on Amazon also. Yeah, and as far as the final word on insecurity, I decided to write this book because I really did see how often it came up in the workplace that that person's just insecure, but I never saw it kind of getting to the next level of asking why and trying to understand what we in leaders could do to support people. So it is the message that I'm trying to get out. I think too often people are just limited because they're labeled as being insecure when really there could be somebody with great talents that could help your organization if you just stop and ask why, and maybe there's something in the company that could be causing that person to feel insecure. So I really want us to just start talking about it more and recognizing that we all have insecurities, every single one of us. And so it shouldn't be something that we feel we need to hide. We can just work on them together.
Yeah. Well said, Melanie. It has been a real pleasure. I encourage listeners to reach out, get connected, find out more about what Melanie can do for you. Check out the book. And as always, I hope everyone can stay healthy and safe, that you can find meaning and purpose at work each and every day. And I hope you all have a great week.
The alchemy of truly remarkable leadership. Ordinary, everyday actions that produce extraordinary results. Consider how the nature of work has shifted over the past 50 years. With increased globalization, rapid technological advancement, and the shift in economic composition, the average job of today looks very different than the average job of 50 years ago. What will the jobs and organizations of tomorrow look like? Moreover, what does this all mean for organizational leaders? What are the core competencies and capabilities of organizations and their leadership that are prepared for continued disruption and geopolitical and socioeconomic shifts? Regardless of what the future holds, increasingly, leaders need to be socially minded, data-driven, decisive, champions of talent, and disruptors of the traditional notions of leadership, teams, organizations, and work. The alchemy of truly remarkable leadership will help you to explore your own leadership competencies and capabilities and consider ways to apply and implement them into your workplace and personal life. Check out Human Capital Innovations magazine, Human Capital Leadership. Human Capital Leadership is a free, interactive e-magazine with the mission to help individuals, leaders, and organizations find innovative approaches to maximize their human capital potential. We publish issues quarterly in August, November, February, and May. Take a look at the latest issue and let us know what you think. Thanks again for joining us for this episode of the Human Capital Innovations Podcast. I hope you stay healthy and safe and that you have a great week.